In just over 100 days, North Carolina voters will play a critical role in choosing the next president, the next U.S. senator to represent our state, as well as all of the people who will lead our state as governor and state legislators, members of the court, etc. It is a huge election, and it's not far away. Carolina Journal is covering the key races, and Rick Henderson, who is editor-in-chief, joins us now for a little update on how the campaigns are going in this time of COVID-19. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Donna.
First of all, I can't believe it's coming up really, really fast, first of all. And then COVID-19 obviously has turned life on its head in every respect. But politically, give us a sense of what is happening. Are we starting late, really, in the campaign?
Well, we are, because I think we're starting late in one respect, because people are wondering now if there are going to be any major live public events between now and the election. It's quite possible there will not be. We are still under the safer at home phase 2, as the buzzword goes, from Governor Cooper's administration until August 7th is now the earliest that it would be lifted. And even if we enter into phase 3, whether or not it's safer at home, I don't know, that's still not going to allow full public participation in large events. And so some of the more notable events, I mean, none of the 4th of July barbecues that take place that are usually these big political rallies, these low-dollar fundraisers where there's a lot of meet and greet opportunities, that's long gone. There may not be anything like that, and I mean, we may not have State Fair this year. They're still planning for that. The Mountain State Fair up west has already been canceled, but we may just see a situation in which there will be a political campaign that takes place with none of these rallies or none of these church picnic type events that allow people to meet and greet with the candidates. And that's unprecedented since maybe it happened in 1918. I don't know.
and a lot of folks are talking about, well, rather than voting in person, I may just file for an absentee ballot. So that could completely change the whole complexion as well.
Yes, if people are not going to the polls, I mean, there's networking that takes place, around polling places. People may choose not to go to early voting sites. For instance, they may just do it all by mail, and it's just a completely different sort of atmosphere. And it's an atmosphere that tends to play in some candidates' hands better than others.
Let's talk about the race for governor. We have Lieutenant Governor Dan Forest, who's the Republican nominee, versus Roy Cooper, who wants a second term. So Dan Forest has filed a lawsuit related to the executive orders and emergency powers that Roy Cooper has used during COVID-19. But Cooper seems to be leading in a number of polls.
Right. The governor is still seems to be ahead by possibly a low double-digit margin in a number of the polls. Lieutenant Governor Forrest is having a hard time making inroads on that. Especially during a time of emergency, Governor, of course, has a much larger pulpit. His megaphone is much louder than it would be during normal times, and to some extent, keeping the state locked down is to the advantage of someone, or to the disadvantage of someone who needs to actually be out and about meeting people and greeting people. I mean, not being able to do that. And that's one of Dan Forest's strengths.
Exactly. Dan Forest has been known during his campaigns for having a very involved and robust grassroots effort,
Right.
Get out the vote effort, visiting every nook and cranny, as the saying goes. And so with the pandemic, that has been curtailed. But I also hear that the Forest campaign has a pretty deep and robust social media effort going on, so they're not completely off the radar.
No, they're not. They have had a couple of in-person rallies as well, smaller gatherings, but they've done that. The campaigns are releasing their first couple of ads, and the interesting contrast between the two. The Dan Forest ad is almost like a sort of a Morning in America kind of thing in a way, or a Morning in North Carolina. The notion that that Lieutenant Governor Forest is the person who can help rebuild the economy, who can bring back the state from this precipice of near depression brought on by COVID-19. The ad from Governor Cooper is very, very somber, and this is a tough time, and we need someone who's strong, who can help us eventually get back at some point, maybe. It's not the tenor of it is not. It's very resolute and not real upbeat. And the Forest ad seems to be resolute and upbeat. And so it's a real interesting contrast.
Let's talk about the race for United States Senate, where we have the Republican incumbent Thom Tillis seeking a second term. His Democratic challenger is Cal Cunningham. You look at the polling on that, and that is essentially tied. So does that mean that Thom Tillis should be really concerned about what's happening here?
Well, he should be concerned simply because he never has surpassed 50% in approval ratings, as far as I know, from his entire time in the U.S. Senate. He has been underwater or close to it, and that's never a good sign for an incumbent. And the other thing is that you do have a very concerted effort by national Democrats to try to pick off a handful of seats in which you do have incumbents who are running, and the interesting thing about that is that some of these races are with people such as Senator Tillis, Susan Collins of Maine, Cory Gardner of Colorado, senators who have not always been close to President Trump. And so they see that as a sign of, or the Democrats see that as a sign of vulnerability in a way, in that these are people who need President Trump to do well in their home state for them to succeed. And there have been times that they have had divergent opinions from President Trump on various areas. Senator Tillis has done the best he can to sort of mend those fences, if you will, but they can still sort of pull that little seed of doubt out. And so it's not helpful to the Tillis campaign at all.
Speaking of President Trump, that's a really interesting scenario as well. Now, we've got former Vice President Joe Biden, who presumably will receive the official nomination of the Democratic Party. We had a recent Republican primary in the state of Alabama where President Trump, his endorsement really ended up in a surge, a big win for the candidate that he endorsed, and against Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, which President Trump essentially on social media campaigned against. Some people are saying that shows the president's strength, although Alabama, a Republican state, what do you make of that?
Yeah, Alabama is going to be fascinating because Tommy Tuberville, former Auburn University head football coach, won the race against Jeff Sessions, who was President Trump's attorney general, remember, and the first member of the Senate to really publicly go to bat for Donald Trump back in 2015. I mean, he was about the only prominent elected official in the country who was really standing behind President Trump early and got thrown overboard. Tuberville won fairly comfortably. Tuberville will be running against incumbent Democrat Doug Jones, who just barely won last time around. And this is going to be one of those races that's going to be interesting to watch simply because Republicans think they can get this seat back. It's a very strongly red state. They think they can get it back, but if they can't, then it's going to be an indicator that it could be a long night for Republicans nationally.
Can Joe Biden do well, essentially, in the pandemic by doing these news conferences from his basement, apparently, and things like that without actually getting out and about?
At some point, he's going to have to get out and do things before crowds of people in more areas where he's spontaneous and the like and is interacting. I mean, he's actually very strong at that sort of thing. But President Trump is having some rallies, getting some energy from those rallies, and just simply showing up at those rallies is something that helps him out a lot, and Vice President Biden is probably going to need to do the same thing.